Hi there, welcome once again to Dukascopy TV. I'm Ben Jones. On the line to discuss whether Colombia's economy can set an example for the rest of Latin America is Harish Natarajan from the AKE Group. Now Harish, Colombia's GDP growth this year is third only to China and Indonesia. What's spurring on this continued growth?
Well, so Colombia's had a very strong year. The economy expanded by about 6.5% in quarter one and still by a very impressive 4.3% in quarter two. Overall, we expect the economy to grow about 4.5% this year and still probably above 4% next year. It's particularly interesting given how weak the rest of the region is going, particularly evident if you look at, for instance, Brazil and Argentina. So what is driving this? I think the first thing to note is the drivers of growth in Colombia have changed over the last few years. For much of the last decade, we've looked at commodities being the cornerstone of the economy. But as oil prices weaken and you end up with more supply disruptions due to a continued conflict with FARC, and demand for metals has softened as demand from China has softened, they can no longer be the driver and the impetus of growth. So what instead is now driving growth is the internal market, strong investment demand, construction growth, demand for consumer products. Part of the reason for all of this is a huge investment and infrastructure project on the part of the government, which is plausible because Colombia has been well managed and as a result is in a stable fiscal position and is therefore able to afford more and more investment. So I think in general, while you once had an export-orientated economy, now that that is softening, what Colombia has and much of the world doesn't are other drivers of growth which have been able to take over, and thus meaning the country is in a much better position than its regional peers, and indeed a much better position than most countries in the world.
Now, do you think other South American nations could follow in Colombia's footsteps? Does Colombia represent a new vision in South America?
Well, I think it's first worth noting that most Latin American economies will need to change over the next few years. For the last decade, the region has gained because of strong Chinese demand, which effectively allowed much of the continent to shift leftward, while at the same time having resources to both expand the welfare state, reduce inequality, while allowing real wages to rise. Now that you've seen the Chinese economy weakening, that's becoming less and less likely. So can Colombia then be the model, a more diversified economy? I think the first thing to note is that Colombia and Peru, to a lesser extent at least, are far less dependent now on resource revenue. And on a basic level, the model is very simple. You need stable macroeconomics, you need a government that's willing to pursue the measures to attract foreign investment, and an active attempt to diversify the economy. Investment, not exports, I think more or less needs to be the driver of future growth. While practically these steps to do that are quite difficult and politically they might be very hard, there's nothing revolutionary in their model. Nonetheless, I think it will be quite difficult for much of the continent to follow Colombia. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first is that Colombia has almost always been an anomaly. It's been one of those nations which has never really politically turned to the left, and it's always been closer to the United States. That centralist population, which doesn't have the same kind of leftward pressure, is one which is a huge asset for the country in terms of diversifying and being about more than resources. That broadly isn't true about the rest of the continent. And I think, secondly, you have a political leadership in Colombia, which is partly as a result of the electorate, just almost always much more macroeconomically sensible. So if you were to compare them with a Rousseff government or obviously the Fernandez government in Argentina, I think you have a much more conservative, much more reasonable government, and one which isn't very easy for other countries to follow.
And finally, looking ahead to Thursday, what are you expecting from the inflation rate release?
So I don't think there'll be anything particularly earth-shattering in these inflation figures. For more or less, again, the last decade, Colombia has been very well managed, and that's one of the reasons the economy has been performing so well. Part of that has been the central bank has been trying to control inflation and done a very good job of it. So throughout the year, when the economy's been expanding, they've been tightening. And the consequence is that inflation is fitting very much within the 2 to 4% target. All signs indicate that inflation this month will probably fit within that, probably around 3%. So still very, very stable. And I wouldn't expect anything more revolutionary than that to come out of Thursday, just highlighting the picture that Colombia is one of the best performing economies in the region, if not the best performing economy, with very stable macroeconomic fundamentals.
Harish, thank you very much for joining me on the line today, and thank you for watching. Keep clicking back to Dukascopy TV for plenty more updates and exclusive interviews. Bye for now.